it's Monday. And you know what that means when it's Monday, power rankings time. And we're going to go straight away because I, of course, will have to do the preview for the midweek games. I got 4 games that I'm going to be previewing after when I finish with this video. And we start with 23rd place, and this team is back at the bottom. And unfortunately, this team is my Quakes team, who is in 23rd place, and rightfully so. They should be belong in 23rd this week because this team is just in a full-scale crisis right now. I mean, it's one thing to lose at home, and it's one thing to blow a 2-0 lead at home, but it's another to do it in a span of 9 minutes. The Quakes went from leading 2-0 in the 56th minute to losing 3-2 after the 67th minute. I mean, or actually, it was the 58th minute before that implosion began. But you get my point about how it took 9 minutes for the Whitecaps to come back into this game, and it took 9 minutes for the Quakes to go back to classic Quakes and just completely implode in this game. And for those people that talked about how, at least I'm not kind of a Rapids fan this week and how they got absolutely destroyed by their biggest rival, 6-0. Yeah, well, guess what? I actually, to be honest, want to rather be a Rapids fan than a Quakes fan right now because at least the Rapids are kind of showing some progression, even with the implosion that has happened, and the fact that right now, when you look at this Quakes team, there's just no hopes with this team. At least with this Rapids team, and at least if their owner can actually get things correct and maybe build a team around Kellen Acosta, which I don't know if that's going to happen because we don't even know if Acosta is going to actually stay with the Rapids, then maybe the Rapids can be competitive again. There is just absolutely no hope for the Quakes right now, and I feel it's worse to blow a 2-0 lead at home and lose 3-2 than it is to lose a 6-0 game. I mean, 6-0 is painful, but to blow a lead like we have and had all that optimism that we could potentially finally win a game, yeah, I would definitely rather take the 6-0 loss and rather knowing that there's no hopes coming back earlier than just have to once again seeing the Quakes suffer, put some suffering on their fan base, and once again put false hope to the fans like they have been doing for pretty much the 1 millionth time this season. And also, newsflash, because this has happened so many times that I have officially giving up and not going to attend the next game, and that I'm going to do a boycott in the next game. But in 22nd, and this team moved up 1 spot from last week, and this team will not be playing until mid-September, and this is really the only time I will mention about the Chicago Fire for these next couple of weeks. But, they did get a draw in that game. They finally ended their 8-game losing streak, but like the Quakes, they pretty much bolted a lead in this game, and they had a good opportunity to finally get their first win against the Columbus Crew, and they just decided to give up a late goal to draw this game. So in some way, if you're a Fire fan, I'm not quite sure, are you happy the fact that you ended your 8-game losing streak when you literally just blow a late lead? And in some way, I don't know, I'm guessing the only happy thing, and I kind of said this back on the review on Friday, is that at least they will not have to see the Fire play until September. Right now, if the Quakes can just forfeit the rest of the game, then I will be really happy right now, because you all know that like the Chicago Fire season, the Quakes season is long and dead berry. But in 21st, and speaking of a team that looked like they are long dead and berry, is Orlando City. Now, Orlando City, I get they had to play against a big team, which is why I didn't actually drop them any spots in my power rankings, and that it was always going to be tough against Atlanta, and I thought for sure that they were going to lose, which they did. But unfortunately, they just could not quite prevent the Joseph Martinez record breaker in their own backyard. And I think that probably is the most painful thing for Orlando City fans to suffer. I mean, when you see your biggest rival and when you see a guy to break a record in front of your own backyard and in front of your turf, yeah, that's definitely not a very good feeling. And I think to be honest, Orlando City didn't really look that bad against Atlanta. There were some spell of period that they actually looked pretty decent, but at the end of the day, they just got outclassed by Atlanta. And, like I said, with Chicago and San Jose, I just think this team is pretty much done, and that this is going to be a very disappointing year. And I think at the end of the year, if I have to name the most disappointing team this season, it has to be Orlando City. I mean, in the preseason, we were talking about them potentially making the playoffs and potentially maybe get up in the top 4 of the Eastern Conference. Yeah, that didn't really quite work out, did it? But in 20th place, and a team that, even though they're still in distance of potentially making the playoffs, this team I still think are pretty much done because of what has been going on. I mean, the Revs, I thought it was pretty much the last straw against New England and that they have to win that one. And if they didn't win that one, I thought for sure New England is probably not going to make the playoffs. And what do you know? They lost that one to the Union. And, in that game, I know that they did give up a pretty controversial goal, but at the same time, they had plenty of opportunity to get an equalizer in that game and maybe even get a win that they desperately needed, but they didn't. They couldn't be clinical going forward, and yeah, they're now find themselves in 20th position, and they're probably maybe gonna stay here for a while. Consider how bad the run has been for the Revs in these last couple of months. But in 19th place, this team dropped 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Colorado. So I really didn't want to put Colorado this low in the table because I really think that 6-0 implosion doesn't really kind of tell the story. The fact that, this Rapids team have actually looked improved. And, in this game, the reason why they lost 6-0 was because they went down to 9 men. After 45 minutes, and if they didn't went down to 9 men, if it was still 11v11, then I kind of felt that maybe this wouldn't have been a 6-0 demolition that they suffer. But yeah, unfortunately, when you suffer that kind of loss and when you lose to your biggest rival like that, you are going to definitely suffer in the power rankings. And in 18th place, and this team dropped 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is Minnesota. And, like with Colorado, I didn't feel like I need to really drop Minnesota, considering the fact that it was pretty expected that they were going to lose to Sporting KC. And I think the 1 spot that they dropped just because they lost that game. And, I think if the Loons does keep losing game on this road kind of murderous road run that they're on, then I think they'll probably stay right around the same area. Right now, it's really kind of hard to put some of these teams that is kind of like, they're probably not going to make the playoffs, but at least they're kind of at least showing some sort of fight. Teams like Colorado and Minnesota. And in 17th place, I'm actually going to put Houston up here, and they actually are the biggest mover, which I'll explain in a minute. But it's really hard to put these teams that at least they're kind of showing some decency, even though they potentially are not going to make the playoffs this year, and move them down near the bottom row. Because when you look at these 4 teams, San Jose, Chicago, Orlando City, and New England, they are equally very bad. And it's hard to put them actually down there. And I might actually even include Colorado, even though I just said a couple of seconds ago that I think the Rapids have definitely improved in these last couple of games before this huge implosion that they had against RSL. But going back to Houston and why I decided to make them the biggest mover, despite the fact that they didn't win the Texas Derby, they drew 1-1 at home, and that probably was the final straw for them in terms of their hope of making the playoffs. It's because at least they were able to fight back, and at least they show some resilience to not get embarrassed, and the fact that they have the benefit of the doubt that most of these teams that is around here all lost or dropped points, and yeah, they of course moved up all the way up into 17th position, and in 16th place this team gained 1 spot from last week, and that of course is the Galaxy. So the 1 spot gain that I have is a benefit of the doubt that they won the El Tráfico series, but other than that they drew 1-1 against LAFC, and I thought they did look very decent in that game against LAFC, and certainly the defense, which has been just non-existent in these last couple of weeks, actually looked pretty decent in that game against their crosstown rival. But right now, if you're a Galaxy fan, even though you did get a draw against your biggest rival and you won that series against them, there has to be a lot of concern that this team could potentially find themselves falling down the table and potentially not making the playoffs this season, because they're only 1 point above Portland, and Portland has a whole bunch of games in hand over them. So theoretically right now, the Galaxy, if we play even game right now, and if this is the result throughout the end of the season with all the team playing all the even game, the Galaxy would be finding themselves below the red line and would not make the playoffs this season. So that is something that Galaxy fans have to really kind of look at and really kind of get a little bit nervous. Although, to be honest, I'm pretty sure a lot of Galaxy fans does not really want this team to make the playoffs, mainly because I just think even if this Galaxy make the playoffs, they are going to be one and done. I mean, I just don't see... When I look at this team, I know they obviously have Zlatan and stuff like that, but it just feel like with this defense, and I know they had a good game against their crosstown rival, but when you look at this defense for majority of this season, they have just looked absolutely awful. And when they do go up against a good team in the Western Conference, yeah, that good team that they will face will just completely rip apart their defense. So even if the Galaxy does make the playoffs, it really kind of doesn't mean much to them. It just means like kind of an extra game more than a hope that they can potentially reach the MLS Cup final. And in fact, I will be very shocked if the Galaxy are able to reach to the MLS Cup final. There's just no way, when I look at that team, is a team that could potentially compete MLS Cup this year. And in 15th place, this team lost 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is Montreal. And like the Galaxy of how they should be sweating themselves in terms of them potentially will not make the playoffs and fall below the red line, the same has to be said about the Impact and how they are just hovering above the red line. And right now, Montreal have a 6-point lead over TFC and DC United, but both of those teams have a couple of games in hand of them. And in fact, DC United, if the season would have ended right now and everybody have played even game, then they would jump over Montreal in terms of that playoff spot. And, for the Impact, it's definitely nervous time right now for them. And, this is the thing about Montreal and why I kind of feel like they're now in a bit of a bad situation of them playing the most game out of the other teams, and that the other teams are literally going to now chase them down, and eventually they will potentially fall short and miss the playoffs. And this game didn't really help to them, because in the last game against TFC they lost 3-1, and they definitely do not look very good, and also definitely do not look clinical whatsoever in that game. And in 14th position, this team continues to fall off the power rankings, and just like it is the case for them in their standings, Portland are just tumbling down my power rankings, and I know the Timbers have a couple of games in hand over them, but they have a ton of games coming up soon, and these aren't easy games for them. I mean, after this game, I think they have to play against TFC, another team that is fighting for playoffs and desperately needs 3 points. And then after that, they have to travel all the way across the other side of the country, and I think they have to play against New England in a midweek game. And we already seen what happened last time when Portland had to go all the way across the other side of the country to play in a short week kind of game. They got absolutely destroyed by DC United in that one. So yeah, for Portland, this is definitely not a good situation. I mean, it's still a manageable situation for them. They still have a chance to bounce back above the red line. But when you look at how many games that they have coming up in a short span of amount of time, and the opponent that they have to face, and the fact that Portland have now lost 4 straight coming into the next game, and in probably equally as bad as the form that they're in than it was earlier in the season. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe another loss or two for Portland. I think Timbers fans got to be worried and really hitting that panic button of them potentially missing the playoffs this season. And in 13th place, this team lost 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is DC United. And this has to be a very frustrated loss for DC United against the Red Bulls, considering the fact that, they couldn't quite grind out a 0-0 result. It looked like the whole game plan for DC United in this one was trying to grind out and get maybe be a point in this one, but unfortunately they couldn't. And as much as they tried to push forward and look for that equalizer and get a crucial point off of the Red Bulls, they just couldn't quite do that. And now, because they drew against the Red Bulls, now they do have to really win those home games. And right now they have won most of their home games, but the thing is, the schedule does not get any easier for DC United. I know that they still have to play the Red Bulls again, and they have to play against Atlanta, and they have to play against NYCFC, I think, twice in these last couple of months. So it is going to be a very tough schedule coming up for DC United, although I think they play against the Union in that midweek game, and that is definitely a huge 6-pointer for DC United. That is a game that they have to win against the Union, who is another team that they are fighting to get those last 2 spots in the Eastern Conference. But in 12th place, this team moved up 2 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Vancouver. So the Whitecaps, of course, with a comeback win against the Quakes, and certainly they needed that comeback win, considering the fact that if they would have dropped points, and if they would have dropped all 3 points in that game against the Quakes, then that could be a moment where you could kind of say maybe Vancouver are out of contention of the playoffs. But they didn't. They got the comeback win, and they're still in the playoff hunt, although now they have to hope that the Timbers does get into a bit of a bad run, and that maybe they have to kind of jump over the Timbers, which is definitely not easy because the Timbers still have more games to play than what the Whitecaps has. So yeah, the Whitecaps, even though they did get a comeback win, they're still not in a kind of good position and not really in the driving seat whatsoever, and need help from teams that is above them if they want to make the playoffs. But in 11th place, and speaking of Philly a couple of seconds ago, that is where they are. So the Union are now up to 11th. They move up 4 spots from last week, and the Union, they are just absolutely red hot right now. And I think this is probably the best time for them to get red hot because of how teams are just fighting it out for those playoff position, and they are building a gap between themselves and the teams that is chasing against them for those playoff spot. But like I said, with the DC United game, they do have that big game against DC United, and certainly DC United in a must-win situation, that is definitely not going to be an easy game for the Union. But in 10th place, this team only moved up one spot despite the fact that they won 6-0 against the Rapids. And, it was a big win for RSL, and it's only the second win of the season, or the third win on the road this season for RSL. And certainly, I've been saying before with RSL, they need to win these road games if they have a chance to potentially make it to the playoffs, which they did in this game, and they kind of got help with the fact that the Rapids just kind of gave up after they went down to 9 men. So, I'm only going to move them up one spot because of that. And speaking of moving up one spot, this team also moved up one spot, and that, of course, is NYCFC. So, NYCFC, of course, drew against the Red Bulls, but they were also down to 9 men, and they were able to hold on in that game and certainly show some resilience to even come back into this game despite the fact that they were down to 10 men for majority of this game. And like I said, they eventually went down to 9 men after the 75th minute. So, yeah, NYCFC in 9th position, and in 8th position, this team, let's see, actually, I think I need to, actually no, I was looking at my Word document, and I think I made a bit of a mistake putting both FC Dallas and LAFC both in 7th place, but it's FC Dallas, of course, that is going to be dropping 2 spots this week. And yeah, I mean, I know they were playing on the road against Houston in the Texas Derby, but that has to be a game that they should have won. And especially the fact that they could have easily went up 2-0 in that game and put the game away, only to lose that game in the 88th minute by conceding a late goal. Yeah, that certainly should be something that Dallas should not be doing. And now the gap between them and Sporting KC is getting closer and closer to being just not a gap anymore, and that it is Sporting KC is roaring back in the Western Conference and roaring back to try to retake that top spot that they've been losing for the last couple of weeks. But in 7th place, like I said a minute ago, I'm going to put LAFC in that position because they drew against the Galaxy. They didn't really gain any ground or lose any ground whatsoever from that draw. So, I'm of course going to put them in 7th position. And in 6th place, this team lost 1 spot from last week, and that, of course, is Columbus. So, despite the fact that the Columbus crew did get a draw against the Fire and able to rescue themselves with a draw against the Chicago Fire, yeah, you shouldn't be able to drop points against the Chicago Fire. And nobody in these last couple of games have ever dropped points against the Fire. And I know even though the crew were on the road and they were playing a very weak squad, they shouldn't be able to find a way to drop points against Chicago. And they definitely did not play very well whatsoever. But in 5th place, this team moved up 4 spots from last week. And that, of course, is TFC, who continued their rejuvenated kind of second half of the season and their chase for playoffs in this second half of the season. And they, of course, capped it off with a win against Montreal. And kind of a bounce back win for them, too, because TFC did drew 1-1 in their previous match against San Jose. And that certainly is a really big win for them against their rival Montreal. But now they do have a really big game against the Portland Timbers. And I will, of course, talk about that game in the preview. And I will also once again emphasize how big that game is between both of those teams for various reasons in each conference. Well, actually not various reasons, but for the same reason, but for different conferences and the different playoff race that they are involved in. And in 4th place, this team stays the same spot as last week, and that, of course, is Sporting KC. So, they beat Minnesota 2-0. Nothing really surprising whatsoever. Everybody knew that was going to happen, so they of course stay at the same spot. And in third place, it's the Red Bulls, who were able to grind out a 1-0 win against DC United. But now the Red Bulls does have a midweek game, and knowing the fact that they look incredibly exhausted from that midweek game against DC United, I'm kind of a little bit concerned for them coming into this midweek game. I mean, if you're already kind of look exhausted and look tired with the amount of game that they had, which they have had a lot of games in a short amount of span, but yeah, this midweek game could be a little bit problematic for the Red Bulls. And for the Red Bulls, there is just no room for error in terms of them if they want to potentially win Supporter Shield and catch Atlanta. And there's just no kind of room for them to just relax for one game and everything is going to go very well. Although they do play, I believe, against the Dynamo at home, so maybe in some way Chris Armour can start a weak squad. Although, like I said, I'll talk more about that in my preview that I will do after this video. And in second place, this team stays at the same spot as last week, and that, of course, is the Sounders. And the Sounders, of course, with another classic kind of gritty Sounders win, with a win against their Cascadia neighbor Portland Timbers 1-0. And, you know, they are, of course, going to stay in that second position because the team that is above them is still by far much better than they are, and they of course are going to belong at the top once again for a very long time. They keep winning, and that of course is Atlanta United. And you know, I said this before on Friday's game, and I'm going to say it again in this power rankings. Congratulations to Joseph Martinez for breaking the single season MLS scoring record, and with 8 games to go, I'm pretty sure that he's going to score 30 plus goal. I mean, you know, in his interview, he says that he is relieved the fact that he has now broken this record. And I think now that the pressure is off of him of breaking this record, and now that he doesn't have to think about breaking this record and get close to the record, now I think he should be able to play with no pressure. And we already seen that when he is playing with no pressure and he's just playing for fun, he tends to do much better in terms of goal scoring wise at that point. But yeah, that is pretty much it for my power rankings for this week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of my power rankings? Did I put your team a little bit too high, or did I put some teams a little bit too low? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. And after I upload this video, it will be the match preview for the midweek games this week.